Hello there, students. I'd like to start this video off with two truisms. These are things that are generally true. The first truism is always do your best. Both myself for my own students and your teachers for you always want you to do your best, no matter what the circumstances or the situation. Always give it your best and never give it less. However, the second truism is pick your battles. It is wise to choose what you wish to expend your efforts on, and it is wise to make a strategic calculation on what it is that you feel you can and cannot do based on your own abilities. With these two things in mind, I present this video to you in which I wish to help you decide if that is what you are going to do for the 2021 AP Social Studies document-based question. This video applies to world history, European history, and US history document-based questions for the AP exam. The document-based question is widely perceived to be the most difficult part of the AP exam. I'm not a big fan of, quote, gaming the system, but the last 14 months have shown me that we all need a little bit of help. It could be on the day of the exam that you get to the document-based question, the final part of the exam, and you find you just don't have it in you. Maybe the first two parts of the exam drained your energy. Maybe you're having family drama. Maybe you're not feeling well. Maybe it's just the last 14 months of craziness have just completely drained your brain. Now, whatever issue you might be dealing with, I sincerely hope that you either are able to resolve it or make peace with it. But regardless, you still want to do well on your exam, and I want to help you do well on your exam. And so this video is designed to do just that. Now, the title of this video includes the word hacking, but we're not really hacking anything here. We're simply making a very strategic decision about what points we want to focus our energy on the document-based question essay in order to maximize our score on the exam. So the strategy is as follows. Looking at the DBQ rubric, this strategy involves targeting what I believe are the 4 easiest points to achieve on the DBQ essay. That is to write a thesis statement, that is part A, write a contextualizing statement, that is part B, as well as take 2 out of the 3 evidence points. Point number 1 for describing the documents, and point number 3 for evidence beyond the documents. The other 3 points will be ignored. Now, that may sound great to you, but here is my caution before you go running off to do this on the day of the exam. You need to be really sure of 2 things. One is you need to feel like you cleared at least 50% on the multiple choice exam. And 2, you need to be confident that you did at least okay on the SAQ. This means that you did, out of the 5 SAQs, perhaps 2 of them perfectly and okay on the remaining 3. If you feel like you meet this criteria, then the 4 out of 7 strategy on the DBQ will probably result in a passing score of a 3 or a 4. I base this information on previous score breakdowns from the 2018 test, which was admittedly different. However, I am operating under the assumption that College Board is not going to unusually raise the bar or unusually lower the bar. If you have been a particularly astute listener, then you probably realize that this strategy rests on how well you know your own abilities. If you don't have a good sense of how well your writing is, then this whole thing could just be shooting yourself in the foot. You need to know yourself before attempting to adopt this strategy. As the famous tactician Sun Tzu said, if you know yourself and you know the enemy, you need not fear the outcome of 100 battles. Or perhaps we could be talking about AP exams. Can I also just say I absolutely hate it when people quote Sun Tzu in a YouTube video. It's incredibly cliche. I would also really like to point out that this only applies to the day of the exam. If you tried to do this in my class, I would not be very happy with you. And if you tried to do this in another teacher's class, they would probably also not be very happy with you. Class time, this semester or the year that you have in your AP class, is meant to be a time to practice and to grow. The test is a discrete and a single day, where if something goes wrong or you have a personal issue that particular day, you may need a backup plan. But that's exactly what this ought to be, a tactic of last reserve, a plan Z, the very last thing you try when you feel like you've exhausted all of your options. With all of that said, let's go ahead and look at the strategy. All right, students, so what we have here are 3 things. One, I've got a Google Doc in which I'm going to type this on to give you a demo of the strategy. We have the 2019 AP World Free Response, that is trade in the Indian Ocean, which I use with my other DBQ videos, as well as the rubric for all AP Social Studies DBQs. So what I'm about to show you applies to AP World, AP Euro, and AP US. And I do want to zoom in on a few things the rubric specifically says. Let's look at the 3 points. The first point we're going to go for, which is the thesis and claim point. Okay. Responds to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. In other words, it has to make an argument. Now, what you may not be aware of, what isn't immediately clear, is that there's nothing in that about reading the documents. Nothing in there says you have to use the documents to create that claim. Now, ideally, you would like to do that. You would want to do that. However, It's not strictly required, right? You can write a claim that has nothing to do with the documents. And so that's what we're going to do. So the first thing we'd want to do is to write a thesis. So I'm going to go here. Thesis needs to respond to the prompt. So what is the prompt? The prompt says to evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. So this is what we're responding to. So we need to make a claim that establishes at least 2 lines of reasoning about how the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean. Okay, so what did the Portuguese do? Well, without thinking too hard about it, without digging through my brain just off the top of my head, I can think of a few things. One is they built a trading post empire in the Indian Ocean and attempted to control the flow of trade in the Indian Ocean via their trading post empire. So those would be my 2 responses to the prompt. How did the Portuguese transform maritime trade in the Indian Ocean? And I'm going to do the thing that a lot of teachers tell you to do, which is to use the wording of the prompt itself. So I'm going to highlight this, hit copy, and I'm going to hit paste. And I'm going to just take this prompt and re-evaluate it. So I'm going to delete that. The Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century by building armed trading posts and establishing political control, and by attempting to control the flow of trade goods in the Indian Ocean. And there you go. We have a thesis that responds to the prompt. Now, have I looked at the documents? Not at all, right? Is it possible that there are documents here that may not support anything I've said about trading posts or controlling the flow of trade? Maybe. I don't really know, though, because I haven't read the documents, and that's the point. You don't need to read the documents to respond with a thesis statement. Just for the record, I have read the documents and I do know what they say, but I'm attempting to prove a point here. Okay, so there we go. That's our thesis statement. We have responded to the prompt with a line of reasoning, 2 lines of reasoning to be exact. All right, so we got the thesis and the claim done. Now we need to write a context statement. This may be the slightly more difficult one for everybody, but it's actually not that difficult because, again, we don't have to look at any of the documents. We just have to look at the prompt. Describe a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. And the decision rules indicate the response must relate to the topic of the prompt, to broader historical events, developments, and processes that occur before, during, and after the time frame. Okay, so it can't just be a phrase or a reference. So we are going to have to write a couple sentences that connect. Now, if you've watched my video on writing a context statement, you know that it's good to kind of start broad and then get really narrow. But in general, you want to point out like 2 to 3 things that came before or during that sort of set the stage for whatever it is that you're talking about. But this doesn't have to be in fancy flowery language. We can literally just kind of list things that put the prompt in historical context. What comes before the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean? Well, we have the classical Indian Ocean trade. We have things like the monsoon winds. What else? We have the diasporic communities. What about Europeans and sailing technology? So we have the introduction of Islamic sailing technology. That's a big one. So these are all potentially things we could just sort of describe really briefly to lead up to the prompt of the Portuguese coming into the Indian Ocean. So for example, we could write maybe 2 sentences that sort of set the stage for the prompt. So for example, the Indian Ocean Trade Network is one of the major trade networks of human history. Evidence of this can be seen in the spread of religions and diasporic communities that have existed throughout the Indian Ocean trade network for centuries. I should probably specify religions such as Islam and Hinduism. Hinduism. Then we'll just quickly talk about Europe with the introduction of new sailing technology into Europe, such as the lateen sail. Europeans were able to easily reach the Indian Ocean and trade there, period. Okay, that's it. We're done. We have set the stage. We've talked about developments that lead up to this prompt. We've given very specific examples that have talked about sailing technology, because we are talking about maritime trade. We've also talked about the Indian Ocean. We've essentially given sort of the background of, we've given some of the background of Indian Ocean trade that has led up to the prompt. Like I said, this might be the most difficult of these 4 particular points, because you do have to know a little bit of information outside of the time period. So this could be a little bit difficult. But my recommendation is this: think about the big ideas and think about some of the big key terms you might have learned in class. Think about some of those go-to examples, some of those sailing technologies that you learned about, some of those key terms you learned about, like sailing technologies, universal religions. This will help make it a lot easier. But it would really help your context if you just put like 1 or 2 specific examples in there. All right, so when we go back and look at the rubric, we've got our thesis point down and our context point down. So just 2 more to go. The next one we're going to go for is the evidence part 1, uses the contents of 3 documents to address the topic of the prompt. Now, the decision rules basically state that the response must accurately describe the contents of at least 3 of the documents. So now we're at the part where we'd actually have to go ahead and read the documents. So let's go ahead and space down a little bit. Let's get a little more. Let's go to the next page. So now we're at a part where we actually have to read the document. So this is going to be evidence part 1. So let's look at that. All right, so now we're going to have to take a look at the documents. But because we only have to describe 3, I'm going to read the first 3 and describe the first 3. Scroll down. Let's see. Document 1. Document 1 describes, we want to use that word describes, the Muslim merchants of Calicut, it's capitalized that word, sorry, of Calicut, pleading with their ruler not to trade with the Portuguese, as the local merchants believe the Portuguese have more sinister intentions. Okay, now that description that I've just written accurately reflects the content of the documents. Now, notice I didn't quote anything. Just quoting is not sufficient for the description point. So here we need to take the contents, put it in our own words. I've given the reader the impression that I know what the document says by sort of putting it in my own words, as well as generally reflecting its content. And this is what you need to do for 3 documents to get to the evidence 1 point. So shall we with the other 2? Let's see, document 2, Duarte Barbosa, government official of the Portuguese trading post. So document 2 is the description of Calicut by a Portuguese official. Specifically, he is describing the situation with the local Muslim traders after the arrival of the Portuguese. Just got to remember to capitalize my cultural groups. Cool. So again, notice no quotes, but we are giving the reader the idea that we understand the content of the document. You also might have noticed, kind of just looking at these free response examples, is that the source itself can give you quite a bit of what you need for the description point, right? Government official, where they are, what they're doing, or what they're describing, right? Maybe just add 1 or 2 details from the document itself, such that he's talking about the location after the Portuguese have arrived, and you're good to go with the description point. All right, very last one. Let's take a look at number 3. Anonymous Portuguese court letter. That is document 3 is a letter written to the Portuguese leader, Sebastian, encouraging him not to make peace with the Ottomans. Actually, let's be clear. We should use our words carefully here. Yes, peace and free trade. So not to make peace or establish free trade with the Ottomans, as they could threaten the Portuguese spice monopoly. Cool. Whoops, I misspelled monopoly. Cool. All right. There we go. 3 documents described. Point. 3 documents have been described that address the topic of the prompt, which is Portuguese trade in the Indian Ocean, which we've done all 3 of. Now, let's go down here to the evidence beyond the document. Uses at least one additional piece of specific evidence beyond what is found in the documents relevant to an argument about the prompt. So this must have a piece of evidence not found in the documents and must be support the thesis. So this means we need to find a piece of evidence not found in the documents that does support our argument, and it can't be anything we've mentioned in contextualization. So Latin sales are out and diasporic communities would be out. Let's get a little space down here. So evidence beyond the documents. Now, again, you would now actually have to have read through all the documents so that you know that what you are including is in fact not found in the documents. Now, I've read through these documents and I can tell you one thing that's not found in the documents would be the mentioning of the monsoon winds. That's not anywhere in the documents, nor is the Mughal Empire mentioned anywhere in the documents. So I'm going to stick with the Mughal Empire because it jives a little bit more nicely with the thesis statement. But essentially, I'm going to mention during this time, the Mughal Empire was on the rise in mainland South Asia, conquering many areas. The rise of this empire would have weakened the maritime empires and allowed the Portuguese to have an advantage and transform maritime trade. Notice I use that word from the prompt, maritime trade. And maybe I shouldn't say empires. I should say the maritime states of South Asia. Mughal Empire, not mentioned anywhere in the documents. Therefore, it's free game. And it still supports my argument about Portugal transforming maritime trade. So the last thing I want to do is take all of these and put them together in a single cohesive sort of written statement that makes it easy for the reader to read, because we do want to be nice to the reader. So first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and delete this, and I'm going to take my context statement, and I'm going to put it up here above the thesis. We're going to blend them together so they jive kind of nicely. There we go. And then we're going to go down here and get the rest of these, and we're just going to go ahead and put them in a single sentence. Document 1, document 2, document 3, just going to put them in a list. Delete that. Space, put a little hanging indent. And we're going to go ahead and delete that. And there we go. So we have our context statement. We have our thesis statement. That's a point and a second point. We have our 3 document descriptions. So we have described 3 documents. That's the first evidence point. And we have a piece of evidence not found in the documents is still relevant to the prompt. This is the evidence beyond the document point. Now, you did eventually have to read all the documents, but you didn't actually have to analyze any of the documents. We noticed that none of the argumenting. Notice that our argument that we have created, our thesis, is not necessarily attached to any of the documents. And notice the one time we're actually making arguments about evidence, that is the evidence beyond the documents, this is also not necessarily tied to the documents, though you do have to be sure that what you're going to talk about for your evidence beyond the document is not in fact mentioned in the documents. In this way, you can get a 4 out of 7 on the DBQ, and you don't actually have to argue with or analyze any of the documents. So that's the strategy in a nutshell. But before I let you go, I really want to emphasize one last time that you need to be really sure before you do this on the day of the exam that this is what you want to do, and you have to be confident enough in your own abilities to judge whether this is what you should do on the day of the exam. The decision is yours to make, but I'm going to ask you to please think carefully before you do this. But with that said, good luck on the exam. Thanks for coming. My name is Mr. Little, and I'll see you next time.